We're live. Hello everyone and welcome to this afternoon's session on the Make for Tomorrow programme. My name is Lucy. Hello and welcome. I work for Sussex Partnership Trust. I'm the Arts and Health Lead, so our programme is called Make Your Mark. Apologies for those of you who've been here before and have heard me say this many times, but for those of you that haven't been here before, hi, welcome. Everyone is welcome, but we're especially pleased if you've not been here before. So this afternoon we've got a really exciting live in conversation with three incredibly interesting and dynamic people, they're going to be talking about all sorts of things, and we would love it if you got involved. So at the bottom of your screen you'll see there's a little Q&A button, so do please click that, and if you've got any questions, comments, you want to contribute, we would love to hear from you. But before we kick off, I just want to quickly tell you a little bit about Make for Tomorrow. So it's an online participatory arts programme, and it's been running since when did it start? Beginning of September, and we're running all the way through till mid-November, and it's a series of weekly participatory activities. So we've got a visual arts strand, so we've had some amazing visual artists doing all sorts of workshops and projects with you all, and then we've also got a performance and actor and kind of literature strand, where we've had this series of live in conversations with some really interesting collection of individuals who work in the world of film and television and literature, having interesting chats. So we're not doing this alone at the Trust, we're doing it in partnership with some amazing organisations. So Hospital Rooms are our visual arts partner, so they've been curating all the visual arts strand of the stuff that we've been putting up online, and then they're amazing. If you haven't heard of them before, do check them out online. They are a charity that work with mental health hospitals, and they're all about getting visual artists into those spaces, working with people who are there, staff and service users and patients, to make those spaces more beautiful, more positive, more creative places to be. And then we're also working with Arts Over Borders. Equally, they are an amazing organisation. They put on all sorts of extraordinary events in extraordinary places. And in a minute, I'll hand you over to Liam, and he can tell you a little bit more about them. But yeah, I think that's about it for me for now. I'm going to do exactly that. Hand you over to Liam, and he's going to tell you a little bit about Arts Over Borders, and then get the afternoon's conversation going. All right, over to you then, Liam, and I'll see you all at the end. Enjoy, people, and do get involved definitely with the Q&A button. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you, Lucy. Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome. Yeah, my name is Liam Brown. I work with my colleague Sean Dorn as Arts Over Borders. We work across the UK and Ireland, curating arts festivals, individual events, with a focus on site-specific work, particularly looking to create unique, unusual events that bring together artists and venues in interesting ways. So our role in this project is to curate a series of conversations with artists and performers in which they discuss the challenges they have faced in their working and their personal lives. And up to now, the events have been one-to-one, a speaker and a chairperson, and the conversations have been quite wide-ranging. Today is somewhat different, and we have two speakers. I'm delighted to welcome actors Imogen Stubbs and Johnny Lewis. And I think today's conversation will be quite focused, exploring particular issues and challenges which Imogen and Johnny have encountered and engaged with in their working lives. So our thanks to them both for accepting our invitation to talk today. They're going to be in conversation with Robert Marx, who works as a consultant clinical psychologist for Sussex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. Robert is also a mindfulness teacher. He's co-lead for the Sussex Mindfulness Centre, and our thanks to Robert for agreeing to chair. So to begin with, Robert's going to say a few words about the work that he does, just to put it in context. Then he'll briefly introduce Imogen and Johnny, and that'll lead then directly into the conversation. So I hope you all enjoy it. It's over now to you, Robert.
Great, thank you, Liam. That's great. So yeah, I'm Robert Marx. I'm a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist working for Sussex Partnership. As Liam was saying, I work in a secondary care service for people, many of whom have experienced trauma and various kinds of anxiety. And I also work to contribute to the training of staff particularly in mindfulness-based approaches and in a therapy called cognitive analytic therapy. And Liam kindly mentioned the Sussex Mindfulness Centre. It's an it's a sort of entity within Sussex Partnership Trust. We provide mindfulness teaching, training and research for patients and staff within the trust, and also for other organisations. We've been working, for example, with the Office for National Statistics for the last few years, providing mindfulness groups for their staff. So I'm delighted to welcome Imogen Stubbs and Johnny Lewis. It's a great pleasure and honour to have you with us. Thank you so much. I'm sure you need no introduction, but it's my role, so I will briefly introduce you. Imogen got a first-class degree from Oxford, then trained as a dancer and then as an actor at RADA. And looking up your performances, Imogen, I counted 76 performances. I expect there's more, but 76 performances over about 35 years. So a very illustrious and prolific career. And I know you're also interested in education and mental health, and have been advocating in those areas. And Johnny Lewis began a career at Sandhurst as an officer, and then due to a back injury changed course, and is an actor, director and playwright. Some of his plays include Our Boys and more recently Soldier On, which focus on military context and on PTSD. Yeah. And he's also a coach and mentor for leaders in the corporate world, helping them manage fear and to develop resilience also.
Exactly.
So really great to have you both. I think it's kind. Well, maybe let me just start by inviting you to say what drew you to doing this this event with us today. Would you like to just say a little bit about that?
Well, I was approached by Liam and Sean to be involved, and I've worked with them before, and I love their projects. I had a mad time in Ireland doing a sort of epic poem on a beach that was the strangest and most rather wonderful experience I've ever had. And I did another project in a castle somewhere. So where they go, I follow. And when they were talking about what the project involved and potentially the audience, I did sort of mention that I thought that just a sort of running through one's life as an actress or something possibly wasn't, the most important thing to be sharing, and that some of the bumps along the way might be more interesting. And because Johnny is not just my partner, so we're locked down together, but also has experienced some of the similar things, but also potentially is more experienced at trying to come up with solutions than I am, I thought it might be a great asset to have him on board as well.
Yeah, that's me as well then. When Imogen said that she was going to be doing this, my ears pricked up, because obviously this is an area that I'm passionate about and have some experience of. So I sort of muscled my way in to be part of it as well.
Great. Well, I'm really glad that you did, Johnny. I mean, it's in the public domain. I think that you have, Imogen had some experience of panic attacks, and I know, Johnny, that you've worked closely with soldiers who have PTSD, and also leaders who experience fear. And it's kind of an interesting concept, isn't it? Because I imagine that a lot of us see you and imagine, you have very successful, and maybe find it hard to imagine that you have these kinds of experiences. So I'm just interested in that. Is there a sort of, do you experience a kind of dissonance between what people might be expecting of you in your role and some of the more private experiences that you have?
Well, in my case, yes, I think so. I mean, I had, when I was at drama school, when I was 20, I, to all intents and purposes, was very happy, very lucky person I'd been to university, I was working in a cocktail bar, and I was very happy and driven at drama school, having a real laugh. And I had a boyfriend who worked in a Mexican cafe. I went with him on a holiday to Mexico, did no research on Mexico at all. It was just a laugh. And we arrived there, and it was quite a shocking place for me. And I was ill very quickly with some sort of amoebic dysentery and various experiences in Mexico that were kind of exhilarating and sort of terribly exciting, but also very terrifying. And, in all this experience, I thought that this was just, that things were fine with me. But basically, I found myself on a beach in a place near Acapulco, going into the sea, and I got hit by a huge wave, a sort of wave that had rolled down from one of those massive surfing waves and thrown onto a beach, very shaken up. Somebody near me was drowned. It was all, again, part of what I just thought was an extremely formative holiday. I went on a few planes that day with this person, and he looked at me and said, "You don't feel very well." I was in a small propeller plane, and I sort of said, "No, I think I don't feel very well. I'm just going to lie down in the aisle for a moment." And I got myself to the aisle, and then suddenly I kind of felt this overwhelming thing, and then and I was absolutely on the floor, unable to move, almost sort of like in a coma, except my brain was functioning, but I couldn't speak. And this led to a whole story of landing, people trying to work out what was wrong with me, somebody giving me a massive injection of tranquilizer, and me sort of coming round like getting into a hot bath when you've been very cold and thinking, gosh, that must have been an awful Mexican virus or something. And that was terrifying, but it'll make a good anecdote. Moving on, things not getting better, ending up flying back. And then 6 months when I thought I was at absolutely the peak of my fitness, happiness, I was on the path to what I wanted to do, of complete and utter hell. But I remember sort of coming across somebody who's now a well-known director saying, gosh, I remember when I met you when you were at drama school, and you were so stunning and you were so fit looking, blah, blah, blah. And I remember thinking, you have no idea how desperately scared and unhappy I was at that time. In the 6 months of, at the time, this was 40 years ago, the quest to find out what was wrong with me. And, that in itself became a very dominant part of my drama training and also of my life. And my empathy with people with whom before, I don't think I probably felt much empathy, because I'd never put my head in the space I then ended up in. I don't want to hold the screen time, but if we talk about it, I can talk about the process of trying to get better. And at the time, how incredibly challenging that was, because anxiety attacks, panic attacks were not spoken of at the time very much. And so people thought I had a brain tumor or a million things. And I had a very little response to the search for what's wrong with me until I met the right person. And the best thing that came out of it was my tremendous compassion for anyone who goes through it. And I think it's this enormous number of people, particularly now. And also my desire to not become someone who doesn't talk about it and tries to pretend to be everything's fine, everything's always normal, gosh, aren't we actors super? But to say, even with all those problems, you can go on, and, if you're lucky, as I have been, you can not just deal with those things, but in my case, I feel like I have in many ways conquered that problem. And I kind of want to share what I know, even though I can't cure people. I'd like to share what I know and feel.
Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like a terrifying experience that you had, and I know from my own experience how terrifying panic attacks are and can be. And I'm just wondering, could you say a little bit more about maybe other times when you've experienced them, and maybe we'll come on later to how you manage them, but it might be helpful for people just to have a bit of a sense of, how they've affected you, if that's okay to ask.
Well, when I was younger, when I was at drama school, I don't think it happened on a plane. I couldn't even say the word aeroplane. I couldn't be in rooms with neon lights. There were all sorts of things that were really overwhelming. I had heightened sensitivity to things. So the legacy, after I'd sort of learned a strategy of coping with it, I felt would be very challenged when I had a child, for instance, or when I first went on stage, and stage fright isn't far from low-level anxiety, and you feed off it. You sort of, it's fight or flight. You kind of need it, but you need to be able to control it or it takes over. So I've chosen a career which potentially is the worst career to be in, if that's something that, whether it's happening or not, it's always there ready to ambush you. You know, I was trying to think, you know, it's in a way the fear of it happening, the fear of the fear, the anxiety about an anxiety attack happening, which can trigger it, of kind of phobias. And in my case, I did become, and still am slightly, I don't shut loo doors, and I think I became quite claustrophobic, which I slightly wear as a badge of honor. I kind of quite like the idea that I don't like being in small spaces, and so lockdown's not exactly, you know, my number one favorite thing to be part of. But you know, for a while I slept outside. And I sort of, I knew the danger areas. I didn't know whether I could survive them. I remember one as an example when I was a bit older, which is a silly thing, because I really felt that with the strategies I could cope. But the Barbican Theatre, where the Royal Shakespeare Company was, I went to see a play everyone wanted to get into, Les Miserables or something. And I was in the middle of a row and I was really looking forward to it. And then the doors at the time all shut at the ends of the row. You're sort of trapped. You didn't have an aisle. And I immediately thought, no, can't do it. And you know, I had to kind of, excuse me, I missed, you know, the ticket must have cost a fortune, but I thought, I've got to get out, you know. And occasionally just, you know, things trigger it. If I'm lying down and my arms start to get a bit pins and needles because my hands are under the pillow, silly things. But I feel that what I learned was how to talk to myself, be kind to myself, not go, oh, you're panicking, but kind of go, oh, you're panicking. Now let's consider what you need to do, and sort of be, I mean, the most interesting thing, if we talk about this a lot, that I found is to be curious about it rather than scared of it. That's a long journey, but when you are, it's fascinating stuff. And so it doesn't go away. Even actually, I thought, oh, I should research, you know, scientifically what it is. And even look at words like, you know, chronic hyperventilation. I kind of think, you know, it doesn't leave you, but I can laugh about things now, which I certainly couldn't then. And I could, and I meet a lot of people, and anxiety attacks and panic attacks come up. And I just want to hug them and just sort of say, this, you know, this can get better. I can't cure you, but I can give you everything I've got in my armory to try and help, you know. And I feel very strongly about that. Obviously, I can't hug them. I'd have to stand at 2 meters and lob what I think at them. But you know, and Johnny, you know, Johnny's very helpful because I'm a shallow breather, and I'm probably as somebody who knows this, you probably look at me and think, yep, classic example of somebody who can get these. I was shallow breathing, hyper, you know, I'm on to the next experience. And I've had to learn to calm down. And I've never really understood breathing or meditation. God knows I've tried. And I'll carry on. But Johnny's sort of much calmer and wiser about those things. And so I like to think we're a good combination. And that's why he's...
Thank you.
Thank you. I was interested in your comment about being trapped, because, of course, being trapped is one of the experiences that is more likely to lead someone to develop PTSD. I know that's not what your post-traumatic stress disorder. I know that's not what you've been talking about, Imogen, but it's another kind of variant of anxiety. And I'm wondering, Johnny, if you know, you could say a little bit about that, and maybe your experience directly or indirectly through the people you work with of that as a different kind of anxiety, really.
Yes, Robert. For me, you know, it's remembering that fear is irrational, and that you can be as prepared as you like, but you know, suddenly something can trigger a fearful response, and you're suddenly thrown into whatever that panic might be. So for me, in, you know, previous life, I met Imogen when we were in next door theatres in the West End.
When there were theatres.
When the theatres were open.
When we were actors.
So in 1993, Imogen was doing St. Joan in the Strand, the Strand Theatre, and I was in the Aldwych Theatre doing an Inspector Calls. And 6 months into the run, so I'd been doing the part of Gerald Croft for 6 months. I'd done about 180 performances, absolutely fine. And I suddenly had during a Thursday matinee, I had a dry. I suddenly forgot the next line. I managed to get myself out of it, but I'd never had an experience like that before, and it freaked me out. And by the evening show, I'd convinced myself that I didn't know any of it anymore. I mean, the brain can play very funny tricks. And I went to see the company manager and I said, that's it, I'd quit. I can't do this anymore. I'm obviously one of those actors that won't be able to do theatre. I was in my dressing room packing my bag full of all my makeup and all my stuff, thinking that that's it, my understudy will have to go on. When the dressing room door burst open and a wonderful older actress called Maggie Tyzack, later to become Dame Margaret Tyzack, who was playing Mrs. Burling, the mother, just marched into the dressing room and said, I hear you're having a panic attack, you're having stage fright, I'm not letting you leave. This is absolutely common, I will get you through it, you just have to trust me. And my instinct was I have to run away. I just couldn't bear it. But actually she did. She just held my hand through that performance, even though the voice in my head was telling me that you don't know the next line, you don't know the next line. And somehow I stumbled my way through it. And during that 2-week period after that, I bumped into Imogen, I think at the stage door a few times.
We didn't really know each other, but I recognized that he was having a sort of panic attack. I looked at him and thought, I know what's happening to that man at the stage door. There's a strange link between us early on, because you see it in somebody, you recognize it. And sadly, I sort of recently have seen a lot of it, you know.
Rather weirdly, I mean, I tried everything. I tried aromatherapy. You know, I even went and did some hypnotherapy with a really interesting command hypnotherapist called Robert Farrago, who at the time was on TV. I think he was on GMTV. And he was terrific because he said, tell me what's happened. And I explained. And he said, well, look, I can put a Band-Aid on this. I can put you under and I can sort the problem out for now, temporarily. But ultimately, you've got to work out why you are self-sabotaging yourself, because that is what is happening to you. You are causing this yourself. And I said, well, why would I? I'm in the West End. It's a great role. The money's fantastic. So that didn't make sense to me. But what happened was I had a session with him. I then went to the theatre and did the show. And what was so strange was I was literally having an out-of-body experience. I was watching myself do the performance and the lines were coming out, but I was not attached to that person. So the helicopter me was looking down thinking, oh, okay, I see. And then I spent 2 weeks trying to work out why I was self-sabotaging. And I discovered that actually what had happened was I'd said yes to extending my contract when I'd been given a placement at the National Theatre to write my new play. And I put that off in order to carry on doing this role. And, you know, part of me was just not happy about that and wanted to leave and do that. So as soon as I realized what that was, I then was able to start dealing with it. And every night I would go out and I'd dry and I'd somehow get myself back on track and I'd dry again in front of 1,000 people. It's your worst nightmare. It's you know, we're all fearful of public speaking, but it was the worst thing in the world. Sweating, heart palpitations, the little voice triggering, all of this sort of imposter syndrome stuff. But what happened was over a course of 2 weeks of the embarrassment and the shame and the humiliation of it, I somehow managed to get back on the horse. I would often wait until everyone had gone home before I left my dressing room because I felt such shame. And I remember getting to the stage door one evening, thinking that I was going to make an escape. Everyone had gone, and a couple, an American couple, were there at the stage door, and they, excuse me, and I stopped, and they just wanted to say how much they'd enjoyed my performance, how much it had moved them, and this, you know, was just such a shock to me. And the character I was playing was sort of having a protracted breakdown on stage, so it was sort of quite easy to incorporate it, and for them, yeah, it was very, very handy actually for that role. But it did make me realize that, you know, you can change behavior if you are, as Imogen said, curious rather than fearful. And I think that being fearful of the fear, frightened of the fear, is the thing, and understanding that that is irrational. And that through my career as an actor on TV in Soldier and London's Burning, you know, was you know, often you'd get the director saying, you've only got one take at this, don't get it wrong. And so that little voice in the head would be, you know, don't get it wrong, don't get it wrong. And so I had to come up with some strategies and tools that would help me, that would alleviate that fear. And that is then what triggered my interest in working with people in the real, you know, in the real world. And so that's what I do a lot of now. I spend half my time working with people on the idea of communicating and understanding these things like fear and presence and confidence. And then that's what led me to, I'm now the artistic director of the Soldiers Arts Academy, and we are a platform for veterans to engage with creativity as a solution to perhaps, you know, PTSD or other sort of mental health issues. So that's a kind of long-winded way of explaining who I am and my interest and this idea of being curious about it rather than sticking in the fear.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I was interested in you talking about, you know, your feelings about the play and where you were at with it. And it just got me wondering, either of you, your thoughts about, you know, how this, in retrospect, because at the time it just feels like it comes out of the blue and it's the last thing you possibly would want. But, you know, does it fit? Could you see in retrospect see it as a communication of something about your, you know, the point at which you were at in your life, or something that you were doing in your life, that it was communicating something to you about that?
Well, in my case, I really was seen by so many doctors trying everything, brains, like not understanding what was going on. And so through the muddle of that, I was going on at drama school. And I, of course, myself was thinking, what is wrong with me? What's happening? Occasionally people would mention paper bag or something. And occasionally, and it was a time of a lot of glue sniffing. So that was, I mean, not joking apart, it was really difficult at drama school to suddenly kind of breathe. And I didn't know what the point of it was. You know, I breathe a few times, just think this is just ludicrous. But I was having it because what was happening to us it would happen very quickly, and I'd literally have to go get an ambulance, you know, and just sort of keel over. I mean, it was now I could see the funny side of it. It was really awful. But what I had occasionally was people saying, I think you need to see a psychiatrist or something. Are you worried about something? I go, yes, I'm worried about what is happening to me. I didn't think I had any worries at all. I wasn't manifesting everything. And then when finally, Hugh Grant's mother, who was a friend of my mother, and they were friends of our, yeah, I know Hugh Grant. They were friends of our family. She said, I think this sounds vaguely like something that I've come across. And there's a woman called, her name is Diana Innocenti, and I think you should go and see her. And I did. And she was the first person she had a kind of machine to measure carbon dioxide. And basically she said, I'm going to tell you what I think is wrong with you. And I'm going to give you a bit of paper, and you look on that and you tell me if this is what's happening to you. And it was full of details I'd not really shared with people because they were very specific about a sort of anesthesia and short-term memory and long-term memory, and even sort of all sorts of things to do with my senses and pains and all sorts of things. And I kind of went, that's it. It was like, honestly, it was like meeting Jesus or something. And she said, not only do I think I know what's wrong with you, but I can make you considerably better, if not better. And I just fell at her feet and sort of wept. But before that, the only phrase I'd come across was panic attack. And that was only very, very vaguely by doctors with 5 minutes sort of saying, well, I think you're having a panic attack, but not saying what it was. I think it's a terrible term because it implies that it's pejorative. It sounds pejorative. It implies that you're sort of leaping, the image is a cartoon, like leaping on a chair going to a mouse or something. You have no idea it's happening. It hijacks you. As I think, I'm not somebody blessed with not being someone who's known depression. But you think of people just getting a bit grumpy and miserable, but I think depression can just hijack people. And panic attacks, it's not linked to something where you're knowingly going through a panicky time. And that's the oddest thing about it.
But do you think that, given the success of your career, particularly early on, you know, first at Oxford, RADA, you know, nominated for Best Newcomer, you had all this success. Do you think some part, given that you know, your natural disposition is very self-deprecating, that very English condition, you know, you're always the first.
Hugh Grant.
Well, you're always the first. Yeah, you're the first person to put yourself down in any situation, you know, and
it's getting quite domestic.
No, but I am curious because do you think there was some part of you, and this might be unconscious rather than conscious, that thought, I don't deserve this, that maybe I need to take it away because I can't cope with the success of it, or that it's too much for me?
That's very interesting. I mean, it could be an element of that. I mean, I think like lots of people, if you're lucky enough to have fingers in different pies, you could think, I think maybe I could think, am I going down the wrong path? Do I really want to be an actress, or am I just doing this because I got into drama school? I mean, there are a lot, you've no idea which one of the billions of things that might be assaulting you it could be. And I think there is an element where I was never quite sure. It was all just happening, and I just go with the flow. I was very much someone who went, oh, I got into Oxford, I'll go there. Oh, I got into drama school, I'll go there. I mean, like, there was a film by Tarkovsky called Stalker. I seem to remember that the person made their decisions by throwing a stone and then just going where the stone landed. And I was a little bit like that. But I also think at drama school, they try to change your breathing. And I was a very shallow breather, and still am. And speedy and like, oh, boring, 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 blah, blah, blah. Let's move on to the next experience. And so they profoundly tried to change that. And we do singing, and that was a lot of exhalation of breath. And, you know, the thing I had no idea about was about carbon dioxide being retained. I didn't realize you had to retain any. But I'd also, Mexico was full of shops. I was with somebody who was a slightly unexpected partner. You know, there's so many things it could be. You know, people would say, you've never dealt with my father died when I was quite young. They'd say, well, maybe you need to deal with your father's death. And I think, I just want someone, you know, I feel like I need the equivalent of insulin or so. I need a cure. I need a physical thing. And then I'll deal with whatever. I mean, I'll deal with any of those things if those are the problems. One of the odd things is you don't know which thing triggered it. And it would be helpful to try and lay to rest various things that might help. But in the end, the main thing is understanding what is happening to you, and to sort of say, well, I think it's because something happened to you in the bath age 3 isn't going to help that immediate fear of your heart going, the sweat, the sense that, you know, you cannot get through life like this. And I had the weirdest thing that at the time, things were going pretty well for me. So I immediately had jobs, I immediately had success, rather kind of high, I had high exposure. And I looked in a way that people wanted to employ at the time. And everything looked like it was great for me. And I do remember thinking, how strange, because I've always been very blithe and very happy-go-lucky. But the only time in my life when I felt like if the world is a bowl of golden light, and then around that is darkness, like just an egg yolk in a frying pan, I am not completely in the darkness. I've got one finger holding onto the edge of that bowl of light. I'm so not in that, but I look like I'm bathed in that. And trying to persuade people of how scared I was or how ill I was, people didn't really believe me. You know, I'm very happily the head of drama school did, and I asked to be taken out of the lead parts, and I just couldn't imagine what would happen if I just keeled over or if these things happened. But actually, people just didn't really believe me because I didn't look unwell. I looked very well. And that was a strange problem of having to sort of persuade people. So the biggest problem I think you face if you're not, is that people think, pull yourself together. You look fine. You haven't got anything obviously wrong with you. You haven't got a medical illness. Well, you do have something wrong with you. You have something very wrong with you. And it's hard to discern what it is and what's causing it. And to be honest, when it's happening, you don't care, because unless it's a physical thing, unless someone injects you with something that makes you feel better, you haven't got the energy or the courage to face all the rest of it. So I think you are right. And I think you know, there are so many things that it could be. And I, you know, acting is a tricky world as well, because you're pretending to be someone else the whole time. And that's the joy and that's the lunacy of it. And you're playing and you don't quite commit in a way to growing up. And I think if I was being hard, really truthful, that I slightly arrested my personality at about the age of 13, probably when my father died, although probably not necessarily a connection to that. And being an actress allowed me to go on being a child in a way and not having to grow up and make decisions about who I was. And it's only quite recently that I think I've grown up a bit like that. But it's a lovely luxury, but it actually means your life is constantly in flux. And I like being in flux. My favorite things are just swimming in the sea for miles. I love that. Walking. I'm a very floaty person. I'm extremely good, not at mindfulness, which I think I'm probably not good at, but at mindlessness. I'm very good at being mindless. But equally, there's something in my intelligence that says, tether yourself. And the kind of education I had was be remarkable. You must be a remarkable person. You must be extraordinary. Whatever happens, don't be ordinary. You're part of a new group of women who are achievers. You can be everything. That is an enormous burden that I think a lot of women of my generation carry, although it was also our privilege, you know. I
mean, that alone makes me feel anxious just hearing that. You've got to be remarkable. That would surely make anyone feel anxious.
Well, think how I feel. I mean,
well, I'm not remarkable, but there's a great relief in recognizing, in fact, weirdly, not much good has come out of the recent crisis, but there is a sort of leveling sense of, you know, you can be a celebrity or you can be all sorts of things, but we're all very leveled at the moment. And there's something, that is one of the good things about it, of remembering we're all part of this strange, bewildering universe where the horizon is tilting, but we're all kind of tilting together. And I think there's something good to come out of that. It's very, it's humbling too.
Indeed. I mustn't ignore the questions which are coming in. So I'd like to just, one of them is saying, are there things that you both do now in your day-to-day life that help you cope with anxiety when it creeps up on you? And I just to add a kind of angle on that, and maybe also, Johnny, you'd like to share some of the things you teach people in that regard. But one of the things I was interested to hear you talk about was this curiosity, that actually, I think you both mentioned it, that the ability to I mean, I think it requires a kind of standing back and noticing something, which actually is what we're doing in mindfulness, and then bringing this sense of curiosity. It seemed to be part of your repertoire of what you do to cope with these kind of experiences, and I'd be interested in that and any other things that you do that are helpful.
What do we do?
What do you do?
What do we do? I go and build sheds.
Okay.
No, it's interesting. I mean, if you're creative, you're creative. And whether it's writing or acting, teaching, I have to be doing something that is about building and creating. Otherwise, I would just go mad, I think. How about you?
We're completely different. Johnny's very proactive. And as I said, I love swimming. And I've always loved swimming. And oddly, there's a whole thing about Wim Hof at the moment, which Johnny's actually done. I thought he was bonkers.
Yes, Wim Hof, for anyone listening.
About going in freezing water.
Oh yeah, the guy who swims through the Arctic.
The Iceman, yes. But I'm a big fan.
He's a big fan. I think it's bonkers. But actually, when I was a child, that was me. I used to swim in anything, frozen lakes in the Lake District in Scotland. I'd stop we had a Volkswagen camper van. I'd kind of go stop and run into a stream or a waterfall. I think that became a bit of a badge of honor. I think that because my parents told everyone, I felt I had to keep doing it. But I did feel really good doing that. And the legacy of my childhood of swimming a lot in anything, in lakes, in anything, and then discovering former Yugoslavia and realizing water could be warmer, is I have a complete love affair with swimming. And if I can swim, I'm happy. And I have an enormous ability to swim for ages. And honestly, I can go back to feeling like a fetus or something. I really empty my mind, which isn't very full anyway. And as I've got older, I love walking. And like I said, I can become a cloud. I'm not lonely as a cloud. I can literally dissipate myself like that and look at the trees. And you know, we're all desperately trying to be mindful, but I actually genuinely stare at them and try and think, I really must observe this. And I'm getting better at it, you know. And that for me, I think, deals with the anxiety I would have if I really listened to Radio 4 too much and think too much about what's going on. You'd be mad not to be anxious. It is very terrifying and worrying. And yet we're still in this, you know, it's a beautiful autumn day. And I do sort of understand all that more. That's my way of dealing with it, is try to train myself to be a small part of this universe and to get through each day, really.
And I do think that we are good at being curious. I don't know whether that's the playfulness that you need in order to make a play as an actor, but the idea of being curious, I think for me, it keeps you in the moment, so that the anxiety or the fear or that kind of inner voice, the judging voice, the imposter syndrome stuff that I feel, when you're curious, you can start to work out a way of changing that behavior. And I suppose in terms of the work that I do, it's all about that. It's all about empowering yourself and self-awareness, which I think is quite similar to what you're doing, Robert. So it's just understanding from the outside in, perhaps rather than from the inside out, in that sense. And so we look at breath particularly because, you know, breath, just like the cogs of a machine, what makes it work is oil. And so the breath is your oil for your cogs. And when there isn't enough breath going around, the cogs start, you know, freezing and doing that. And it's exactly the same with that. And that can trigger the fight, flight, or freeze response, a negative response anyway. And then, you know, we look at body, what you're doing with your body language, particularly your eyes, your spine, how engaged physically you are. So if I was to say, if you were listening, becoming aware of what we would call your resting bitch face, You know, we all have a bit, you know, and it can sometimes come across as rather judgmental, you know, but actually you're just listening and processing. But actually, if you start to become aware of if someone's watching you and they're needing something from you, that can look quite scary. So my self-awareness can actually help someone else in terms of that communication. And then the voice, what is your voice doing? Of course, your breath helps you to create your voice and how you stay on your voice. And so, for example, the relationship between vowels and consonants. So consonants tend to carry meaning, but vowels tend to hold our feelings. So, for example, if something very heavy dropped on my foot, I might go, ow. I'm not going buddha chufa gubba. Ow, it's a pain, it hurt. Ow is a vowel, it's a feeling. So our vowels, our feelings travel in our vowels. And when we don't have much going on with that, when we're quite, you know, doer and we don't have much sound going on, it can trigger an anxious response from someone else because you're not making space for vowels. So sometimes when people say, oh, you talk too quickly, or, you know, you're garbled, or actually what you're doing is you're not making enough room for your vowels. And that can be just like as an animal, you know, if we copy each other, and if you yawn, I might yawn. And the same thing can happen with our voice, the signals that we're sending out. So I tend to look at what I call these pillars of presence. So that's the breath, it's the body language, it's the voice. It's finding a connection with the floor, earthing yourself, just like you would with electricity, because actually nervous energy can be very good, but it's how you manage it rather than it destabilize you. That's the important thing. And intention, you know, why we say what we say. And that's not just about intellectual intention. It's all about emotional intention, how you want people to feel about what it is you're saying. So it's a package of things. We don't tend to be very good at reading body language positively. We tend to project negatives onto people's body language. So unless you turn the dial up on your own responses, people might project negatives onto that. So that's the area that I work in with communicators, leaders. I run a course actually for the Florence Nightingale Foundation for their senior leaders and emerging leaders on this kind of stuff, on as a leader, your presence, and how when you start looking at this stuff, you start to have more choices. And that's what's important. If you can start to give yourself more choices rather than that kind of anxiety and fear of that's just how I am, or getting locked into that. So that's
interesting, because when it comes down to, like, when you talk about carrying the vowels, the emotion in your vowels, I think the fundamental thing that causes anxiety attacks on a medical level sort of is that you don't retain enough carbon dioxide. When you do biology at school, or in most of our lives, you have no idea you're meant to retain any carbon dioxide. You think, well, surely you just exhale carbon dioxide. But of course, if it, you know, in your vowel sounds, if you're, you know, over exhaling, you're emptying out. And what I discovered was that I had no carbon dioxide. I literally was running on empty. And, you know, I kind of think, but that can't be bad. Carbon dioxide is a bad thing. And of course, you have to retain some. And that kind of oils the cogs, and that's, you know, motor neurons, and all sorts of things happen that I don't completely understand. But once you understand that, you can work on that. And you can think, okay, I can work on not exhaling, you know, I can hold back some, I can have a strategy, I can have a breathing mnemonic that I go through when I'm feeling like that, which is, the paper bag then has a logic that you are breathing back your carbon dioxide, which makes you feel pretty dead and a headache, but does stop the fluttery panic. And once people start explaining to you or have diagrams, it's a relatively simple, basic idea, but it's also fascinating. And tribes use it to walk on coals, and suddenly it really does become interesting. But also you can take back control. It's not about, I mean, I think antidepressants and Valium and whatever is out there has its place. It obviously does. But the joy of knowing that you can maybe in liaising with that, or maybe independently of that, you can take back control and think, every day I can work on something which is holding down that. I can be aware of when I might be doing that, you know, all this weird thing like panting. You think, who's ever aware that they're panting? Apparently I was panting up the yin yang, you know, and I'm thinking, how would I not notice? But you just have to accept a lot of stuff, and then almost enjoy the process of trying to work out how you foil it, how you get the better of it. It might not make you better, but you're certainly going to take steps towards your own recovery in some way. And then there are all the other problems to deal with, but that's a start. It's good to it's good to know that you can be in control in some way just by understanding it, and by someone not patronizing you, by not explaining it to you. It's not complex, the basic thing.
Yeah, and of course the sense of uncontrollability is very likely to lead to anxiety. So that makes sense what you're saying, that, you know, if you do things that develop a sense of control, that will help. But the other thing that strikes me from what both of you were saying is how physical your coping is. So
Yeah,
you know, swimming in the sea, building sheds, working with the breath, it's all in the body, isn't it? And by contrast, you were highlighting earlier that one of the problems is kind of in the thought, the fear of fear, which is one of the kind of models of panic attacks, that we develop this fear of the fear. And then we often try with our head to try and find our way out of it, and we can then get a bit lost in our head. But actually, I think what you're highlighting is that the body can be a place where actually things can get processed and move on. And actually there's more and more research lately is talking about the trauma being stored in the body, and the therapies that we're using increasingly are working at the body level, not necessarily at the verbal level.
Robert, do you know of Bessel van der Volk's book?
Yeah, exactly.
I found that transformative, especially with my work with the veterans, on understanding how, you know, the trauma can be held and retained in the body. And actually then you can start to work out ways of helping to release that. So just the process of telling stories, being creative, letting go rather than control, has been incredibly powerful for, you know, several of the veterans, you know, being creative rather than the holding it and the panic, the shame of that, all of that stuff that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, and also on a very basic, on the more basic level, I noticed when I used to have them very badly, that if I went, I mean, it's not an option for everyone, because of course lots of people get panic attacks who can't do all this, who can't necessarily move. They might be in, you know, all sorts of reasons. But even on some level, that if I did any exercise, if I ran, and it's not just because I used to be very sporty, but if I ran or I just moved around, my body took over the breathing in a way that my analytical mind would go, what's happening? Oh my God, am I having one? So shut up. And my body, literally my breath took over, my running breath or my walking fast, but anything. The minute I did physical exercise, it really helped. I mean, for me, the biggest clue that I had, which was really fascinating, was that, and this is just a physical thing where we could have worked this out somehow, is that when I was in Mexico, when the first time I'd been really ill, I'd been in a very primitive hospital, and the British Council had thought I was on sort of major hallucinogenic drugs or something. Nobody really took it seriously, just thought I was off my head on drugs, which has never been my thing, I hasten to add. And we went to a hotel and I went swimming. And I remember not just my partner, but loads of people jumping in the pool and dragging me up to the surface. And I was like, what on earth? Why have you just done that? And he said, you've been under for ages. And I thought, well, I had no need to come up. I felt like this little terrapin or something. I was having a lovely time, and suddenly you all leapt in and dragged me out. He said, you've stayed under way longer than should be possible. And of course, because I had no carbon dioxide, I had plenty of oxygen for way longer than usual. And looking back, I think, oh, that was a big clue. But I also thought, God, how fascinating. I suppose people in places where they dive for pearls or something, they must induce. And then I induced the state and realized that, you know, gosh, if you can induce it in order to, you know, tribal people induce it the whole time, then they must have a sophisticated way of controlling it. And if they can, then I can, you know, and like I said, that's coming from a rather lateral view. But it's a very different take to an illness to kind of say, come on this fascinating adventure. You know, there will be stumbles on the way and we may end up where we began. It's very different from come into this dark, scary room with me and, you know, let's freak each other out and then just die of shock. I was amazed as well that panic attacks aren't necessarily going to leave you with a legacy of terrible heart problems or lung problems. It feels like the damage done is irrevocable. Again, that's wonderful to know that it isn't. It isn't. It's extraordinary, but it isn't. So there are so many consolations that can just give you a stepping stone to be brave enough to kind of face it. And I do think you have to be brave. You know?
And more than that it doesn't cause irrevocable damage. There is this concept of post-traumatic growth, And you were hinting at it.
I like the
I
idea.
think when at the beginning you were hinting at it when you were talking about empathy, and how this experience has really increased your ability to empathize with people, and you were talking about feeding off it as an actor, and so it's interesting, isn't it, how I guess it's probably something that we clock after the event rather than when we're in it, but this idea that actually we can grow from these experiences, and you've hinted at quite profound things there that you've grown from.
Can I ask you something? Because you teach mindfulness, and I know that's very much a sort of thing at the moment, and it's an aspiration for most, especially in lockdown. It's an aspiration for everyone. It's so hard to get your imagination kind of focused on how you actually do that, and I know what it is, I think, but I'm fascinated to know how you tether yourself enough to really truthfully and authentically begin the process of doing that, rather than just thinking, look at there's a tree, there's the sky, there's a duck, but that's not quite it. I think lots of people must be beating themselves up because they think, I should be being mindful, I should be present. At its worst, when I had panic attacks, I'd look at a table, I'd touch the table, but either the sensation was sort of thin and dry, or I didn't really feel the table. I was like I said, I celebrate my floating now, but at the time I was just, what Johnny said about being a helicopter, I was outside of myself, looking in at myself, thinking, where I've disappeared. But maybe that's a survival technique. But obviously mindfulness is the opposite. You're very present, and I'm fascinated to know how you do that. In a nutshell.
I think it's probably much more ordinary than you're implying. It's a lot of the things you've been talking about, the sense of curiosity, mindfulness. We talk about developing the sense of beginner's mind. So we're taking this approach that, if we're eating something, we eat it as if we've never tasted this thing before, and we come to it very fresh and kind of naive and curious, your word, curious. And I think it's also very embodied, to come back to the point we were making earlier about being in the body. So if we are going off somewhere else, it does invite us back into the breath, or back into, Johnny, you were talking about, being earthed. So that's something we use as well, very much, feeling your feet on the ground and just really coming into the physical embodied experience of that, rather than jumping off into what you were also talking about, the fear of fear, for example. If we get lost in that, and we get lost in ruminating about that, that's likely to make us more anxious. But if we come back to our feet on the ground, or the coldness in our body when we jump in the water, or whatever it is, that's it. It's not really more complicated than that, unless maybe I'm missing something, but that's my understanding.
I think the self-talk is so important as well. In the work that I do, the amount of time and the amount of people that just have that, either with a big voice or a little voice, have that self-sabotaging, negative, sort of self-destructive talk as a kind of background noise that they're having to live with on a daily basis. And sometimes it peaks if they're asked to, talk to the executive at a board, but other times it's just background noise, but it kind of rears its head. And I think self-talk is incredibly important, positive self-talk. And I love the quote from, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. But either way, you're right. We make this, the conditions for success and failure in here. And I'm not very good at that, or I'll never do that, or you will convince yourself not to do it. And so just to start changing the self-talk can be very powerful. Just to give yourself a choice, stay curious, stay in the moment. Don't allow that sort of, I feel crap, or I got the wrong answer, or that fear of being judged, which we all have, which can be overwhelming a lot of the time. And just to say, well, I'm going to feel the fear and do it anyway. And, as long as it doesn't kill me, I'm still here.
Yes, and as actors, you deal with so much rejection. I mean, everyone does it all the time. You have to build a very thick skin, but at the same time, you have to remember that what makes you any good as an actor is to stay not having a thick skin. So it's an awful contradiction. And it's terrible because you see what it does to people. You know, it can really wear you down. I mean,
to care and to not care.
To care, you have to, you know, teach us to care and not to care. It's a hard learning thing, but it's the same in a way with the way the world is now. We both have children, and they're, you know, they're in their 20s. And I see the dangers of social media, and I see the dangers of a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Everyone knows a bit about everything. Rolling news. I mean, I'm saying things that are cliches probably, but I'm not on social media because I couldn't cope with that. And that's why I'm able to sort of have an emptier mind, I think. But the amount of noise and clutter that arrives on these poor young people, but everyone, but particularly the poor young people, is more than a human being can really bear. And you have to kind of let them on. It's so hard for them to understand. They kind of have to care and not care. They can't care about every animal, and they can't care about every problem of climate change. They need to care, but they can't take on the responsibility of being the main carer because it's too much. They can pick things and say, I'm going to really put my mind to that. But my children so often take on the world. They're burdened with the terrors and the, as I said, you know, you have to sort of almost deliberately become a bit more superficial, or in a way, sometimes you have to care less in order for yourself to, you know, regain your strength and see things more objectively. Otherwise, it's a tsunami that's too much for them.
Yeah, and I think create a bit more internal space is what you're, you know, also talking about. And you know, another aspect of mindfulness really is to see thoughts as just energy rather than as facts. So, you know, we're not, just because I have a thought that I'm rubbish and I can't remember my lines or whatever it is, we just train ourselves to realize that all that is a thought. It's not a fact. And then we can come back more into the physical experience a bit more.
Pass.
Pardon?
This too shall pass.
Yeah. I'm aware of the time. I'd love to go on. I'm really enjoying this. And I think I need to kind of tie it up and just thank you hugely. I think it's very courageous and generous of you both to share your experience so personally. And I hope it's been as interesting and helpful for me as it has for others as it has for me. So, thank you.
I hope so. Well,
absolutely. Thank you, Robert, for hosting it.
So let me pass.
I'm your patient. We live nearby.
Lucy, I think over to you.
Yeah, thank you, all three of you. What an interesting, I was completely absorbed. That was fantastic. And yeah, I do hope those of you who've been tuning in wherever you are, whether you're at your kitchen table, on the sofa, in a hospital ward, in an office, listening on your phone in the park, thank you so much for being here. But yeah, that was really so fascinating. It felt very kind of kindly pragmatic, the way you were talking about these intense experiences and some really interesting practical advice. Actually, we must, you mentioned a couple of, Johnny, you mentioned a book, and I was quickly trying to write it down so that we can share on social media if people want to try. What was the name of the book that you mentioned, Johnny?
Yes, it's a wonderful book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. The
Body Keeps the Score. All right, we'll find it and we'll share it with everyone, just in case people want to look that up. You also mentioned Wim Hof, and I loved all the talk about swimming. Yeah, that definitely resonated with me. I know it will have resonated with others who've been listening in. A very good friend of mine who suffered a terrible trauma. He does, I can't remember what it's called, but it's that swimming, it's almost like swimming, holding your breath for as long as possible. But that really resonated. Lots of those processes of slowing things down, recognizing what's happening physically, not allowing that fear to completely take over in that moment. I mean, yeah, so interesting. Lots of words of wisdom and really good, I don't say the word tips lightly, but really good advice, really good, wise advice. So I just want to say a huge thank you so much, all three of you.
Thank you.
And people, do please let us know your thoughts on social media, or get in touch with us if your questions weren't quite got to. Please do keep speaking to us, because we would love these conversations to carry on. But yeah, I think that's about it for this afternoon. I just want to, apart from saying a huge thank you to Johnny, Imogen and Robert for being here, thank you so much everyone for giving an hour of your time to be here together. We are in very, very strange times. Imogen, I loved your visual image of saying that, how did you word it, was that the horizon is tilting, but we're all tilting together. And it is true. I think it's so important that we can come together, albeit virtually, in these days where we are separated and it is tough. It adds to often struggles that are already present and they're already difficult. So thank you for giving your time, for being here today. We really appreciate it. I just want to say a quick thank you to our funders who have funded Make for Tomorrow. That's the brilliant Arts Council England and also NHS Charities together. They've contributed financially. The Trust Charity Heads On, who are completely amazing fundraise for us. And also behind the scenes, the brilliant COGAP, who in these days where technology has become even more important for us to be able to connect and spend time with one another. COGAP are a fantastic organisation. They get all our links and all, make sure we're pressing the right buttons and that everything's kind of running smoothly so that we can come together, and that is actually an asset rather than a hindrance. So thank you, COGAP, that's great. But just to say, everyone, there is lots of stuff. So next week is a little bit quiet, but the following week, Make for Tomorrow, we've got a big week-long festival where we're celebrating all the fantastic stuff that's been happening over the last couple of months, all the artwork that you've been making, all the conversations that we've been having. So we will be in touch, and do keep an eye on the Make Your Mark website to find out what's coming up, because there are some really, really exciting things. But also in the meantime, all of this stuff, including the session today, you can find it on our YouTube channel, and it's also embedded on our website. So do go and check it out, and follow us on social media to keep in touch with all the little daily things that are going on. But thank you everyone for being here, and we'll see you at the next event, I hope. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye. Bye, Robert.